Australia was the wild colonial boy.
Ben Hall rose at first light from his makeshift bed of dried leaves. Already dressed against the cold of the night, picks up his bridle and walks along the edge of the scrub and out into the open plain towards his grazing horses. In their well-hidden positions the police were huddled against the cold pre-dawn, their weapons cocked and ready for action, waiting patiently for their quarry to show himself. The first rays of the sun started to lighten the new day, 5th of May, 1865, as the two hobbled horses the police were watching intently grazed nearby, when a figure quietly emerged from scrubland out onto the open plain, a horse bridle in his hand. Ben Hall walked some distance out into the open plain, now totally exposed. He spots 3 men running bent low towards him. Stunned, Ben Hall drops the bridle and turns to run. The men are coming faster now. They are now at his back when the first bullet slams into his left shoulder, fired by Inspector Davidson. Ben Hall shuddered at the first impact. Extract of Sergeant Condell's statement on oath. I started from Forbes in company with Sub-Inspector Davidson in pursuit of the Bushrangers, Hall, Gilbert and Dunn. On the Thursday night following, we observed 2 horses hobbled in the bush. We watched the horses for about an hour. We then saw a man approach the horses and take the hobbles off and lead them through the bush for about 150 yards. He then hobbled the horses and let them go. He afterwards proceeded into the scrub, and immediately afterwards we were informed by the black tracker, Billy Darrigan, that he heard him scraping on the ground as if to make a place for a bed. Sub-Inspector Davidson and myself then posted the men in a half circle on one side, and Sub-Inspector Davidson and myself to the opposite side. Myself, Mr. Davidson and the tracker crept through the bush in search of his camp. Finding that we could not succeed in discovering the camp, we resolved to watch the horses all night, and about 6 a.m. the next morning we saw a man emerge from the scrub into a piece of open country and walk in the direction of the 2 horses. When about midway from the camp to the horses, we started in pursuit and ran about 50 yards before he observed us. He then looked up and saw us. He turned and ran from us. Sub-Inspector Davidson then called on him to stand. He looked around and still kept running. Sub-Inspector Davidson then fired at him. Immediately afterwards I saw Hall jump. He still kept running. I then levelled my rifle at him, covered him full in the back, and fired. I believe the shot took effect between the shoulders. After this he rolled about, and when running appeared very weak. The tracker then fired with a double-barrelled gun, and I believe hit the deceased. We called out for the men stationed on the opposite side. When he saw them emerge from the scrub, he turned and ran in another direction. The men all fired, and I believe most of the bullets hit him. Deceased then ran to a cluster of timber, laid hold of a sapling and said, "I am wounded. I am dying." The men then fired again, and he immediately rolled over. He threw out his feet convulsively once or twice and said, "I am dying. I am dying." We all then approached and found he was dead. I have known the deceased for about 4 years. About 3 years ago I escorted him as a prisoner to Orange and saw him frequently afterwards. I identified the body of the deceased as that of Ben Hall. 6th of May 1865, James Condell. Extract of Sub-Inspector Davidson's report to Inspector General McCleary, 12th of May 1865. A little before 7 o'clock we saw the man, whom we instantly recognised as Hall, moving out of the scrub with a bridle and a revolver in his hands, and making for the horses. On his coming on the plain opposite us, we commenced to run and gained on him 50 yards before being seen. Seeing us, he immediately dropped the bridle and ran, having the revolver in his right hand, and made towards the hidden men past the camp. I ran after him a considerable distance, calling on him to stand several times, gradually gaining on him, and when within about 40 yards, fired. The shot taking effect in the left shoulder. He looked around, I thought with the intention of firing at me. I put up the gun again to fire, but did not. Condell and Darjan then fired 2 shots each, which seemed to have a slight effect. The 4 men and Charlie now showed up. Hall, seeing them, turned to the right and made for a small clump of saplings on the plain. He still had the revolver in his hand. He caught a sapling with his left hand with the intention of trying to shoot around it. This he continued to hold until he fell. At this time I noticed Hipkiss firing with a revolving rifle, the bullet from which struck Hall on the belt and cut it, his revolver falling to the ground. Hall then seemed to be badly hit and appearing to me about to fall. At this time the whole of the remaining shots were fired. He fell back saying, "I am wounded. I am dying. Shoot me dead." And after a few convulsive shudders he moved no more. The body was then packed on one of his horses and taken to our camp, and there remained until night, when 4 of us started with it for Forbes, the others being left in case Gilbert and Dunn should come before we had time to get back again. The night during which we watched the camp was most bitterly cold and frosty, and being without boots or coats we all suffered severely, and in the morning when running were bent nearly double with cramps and cold. The coolness, courage and determination of the tracker Billy Darjan is worthy of substantial reward, and the greatest praise is due him. Tracker Charlie, from his behaviours, should not, I think, participate in the rewards beyond some slight recompense. Herein is enclosed is a list and description of the property found with Hall at the time of his death. 74 pounds in notes, 3 gold chains, gold watch, portrait of a female, 3 revolvers and a number of bullets, gold ring keeper on his finger, saddle, clothing apparel, 2 single blankets. I have the honour to be, sir, your obedient servant, J. H. Davidson. Extract from the Grenville Record, 6th of May, 1865. The writer was in Forbes when the body of Ben Hall, pierced by 32 bullets and thrown across the back of a horse in a sack which only partially concealed the mutilated corpse, was brought into town by police. It appears from the evidence taken at the inquiry that with the first faint tinge of approaching day, Hall rose from his bed of gum leaves, shook himself, and taking up his bridle, was about to start in the direction of where his horse was grazing, when Davidson called out for him to surrender. Whether, like the Irishman's, the sub-inspector's excited exclamation was, "Surrender," 3 times, and then shooting before a response was possible, or whether, after the manner of the black troopers, the shooting was first done, and the order to surrender given when the work was accomplished, is not exactly clear. It is clear, however, that the bushranger never attempted to use his revolvers, of which he had 2 in his belt. The ball from one of the first rifles fired, there were 16 in all, cut his leather belt in 2 and passed right through his body. The revolver fell to the ground, and while the bushranger hung on to a sapling with his death grip, the firing was kept up until the body was riddled with no less than 32 holes, after which, being considered no longer dangerous, it was taken possession of by its gallant captors.
But a bullet pierced its brave young heart from the pistol of its right, and that was how they captured him, the wild colonial boy.